All right, welcome to this session on Daniel. This is segment 14, and this is Daniel chapter 9, part 2. God's answer to Daniel, the 70 weeks. If you have a syllabus, your syllabus is going to say segment 13. It's on page 68. And you can turn to Daniel chapter 9. We'll continue in from where we left off last week. Last week, we looked at the first verses, most of this chapter, about the prayer of Daniel up till verse 19. And Daniel coming to an understanding of the 70 years and why they were in captive 70 years. And then God sends Gabriel, and he gives Daniel this answer, which is amazing. I'm going to present this to you how I understand it. Now, I think you'll find many people have written a lot of works, a lot of different interpretations of this, and what I'm giving you is simply my understanding. But it's pretty exciting. It all comes to the same conclusion, I believe, however they look at it and however these numbers work out. I kind of sense this answer to Daniel that God gives him is similar. Do you remember with David? And David had this desire to build a house for God. He said, God's, I have a house, and God lives in a tent, and I want to build God a house, right? He has this desire, and God then sends Nathan the prophet back to Daniel, and he takes him to a whole nother spiritual realm. Daniel's looking in the physical, saying, I want to build a house for God. I want to build this temple. God then's answer to Daniel through Nathan the prophet is, David, I'm gonna build you a house. And he gives him the messianic promise, and that from his seed is going to come this one who's going to rule forever. And you have the great Davidic covenant. So he takes the natural, this physical temple that David's thinking about, and he takes him to the Messiah. You have the same thing here with Daniel, where Daniel is praying about the 70 years. He's praying about the return of his people and his city, Jerusalem, and the desolations, and the answer to this. And we'll start back where we left off last week with Daniel chapter 9, starting in verse 20 again. God's answer to Daniel says, now while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before Yahweh my God in behalf of the holy mountain of my God, while I was still speaking in prayer, then the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision previously, came to me in my extreme weariness about the time of the evening offering. He gave me instruction and talked with me and said, "O Daniel, I have now come forth to give you insight with understanding. At the beginning of your supplications, the command was issued, and I have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. So give heed to the message and gain understanding of the vision. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city." Well, hold on a minute. Daniel was talking about 70 years. Why they're, and now Gabriel says, Daniel, I'm supposed to tell you about this. I'm going to tell you about the 70 weeks. And let's go on. What's going to happen in 70 weeks? And it goes on in verse 24. In 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah, the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with plaza and moat, even in the times of distress. Then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. We're going to take a look at this tonight and take some time to understand this answer to Daniel. So first of all, what does it mean when he says 70 weeks? 70 weeks. The word weeks is the Hebrew word shabuah. Shabuah. And it really means a set of 7. It's a heptad. What we call a week is 7 days. That could be a shabuah. 7 weeks can be a shabuah. 7 years can be a shabuah. In fact, I'm not going to get in details with this, but if you look like we use the word week a lot, I think, when we in our calendar we talk about weeks. That's not used much in the Bible. The word week. It's not used a whole lot as a way to define a calendar event. They usually define weeks by Sabbaths. On this Sabbath and the next Sabbath. Even in the New Testament, it's done by Sabbaths. When you get to the book of Acts, on the next Sabbath day, in other words, it's called a Sabbath. The term week is not used that often as a calendar speaking. Days are used, months, years. So the word week simply, shabuah, means a set of 7. It's a heptad. And I think the very first use of this in the Bible gives us very good understanding of what this word means. And that's in Genesis 29. And I think you're familiar with the record, but let's read it. Genesis 29:16. This is when Jacob comes to Laban. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The older one was Leah, and the name of the younger one was Rachel. And Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful of form and face. Now Jacob loved Rachel. So he said, I will serve you, talking to Laban, serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than to give her to another man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days for his love for her. Don't you love that? Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my time is completed that I may go into her. Laban gathered all the men of the place and made a feast. Now in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to him, and Jacob went to her. Laban also gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. So it came out in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? Was it not Rachel I served you for? Why then have you deceived me? But Laban said, it is not the practice in our place to marry off the younger before the firstborn. And then look what he says to Jacob. Complete the week, the shabuah, for this one, and we'll give you the other for the service which you shall serve for another 7 years. Jacob did so and completed her shabuah, her week, and he gave him his daughter Rachel as his wife. So the very first use of shabuah in the Bible is talking about 7 years. Do you see that? He was going to work, he needed to work one more shabuah for Rachel, 7 years. And I believe that's the use and understanding we have here in Daniel. But it's used in different ways. Another way it's used, have you heard of the Feast of Weeks? We call it the Feast of Pentecost. It's actually the Old Testament term is shabuah. We get Pentecost because it's 49 days, and then the 50th day is, we call it Penta, 5th from the Greek. But in the Hebrew, it's shabuah, the Feast of Shabuah. Today in Judaism, they call it Shavuot. And I believe that comes directly from Shabuah, the Feast of Shabuah. And that's described here basically in Leviticus 23:15-16. You shall count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, from the day when you brought in the sheaf of the wave offering, there shall be 7 complete Sabbaths. You shall count 50 days to the day after the 7th Sabbath. Then you shall present a new grain offering to Yahweh. So it was 7 Sabbaths, a Shabuah. It's the feast of Shabuah, 7 Sabbaths. And as we saw last week, besides the weekly Sabbath, the sons of Israel were to give the land a Sabbath every 7 years. And that we saw last week, Leviticus 25, 1-6. The Lord spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai, saying, speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I shall give you, then the land shall have a Sabbath to Yahweh. 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather its crop. But during the 7th year, the land shall have a Sabbath rest, a Sabbath to Yahweh. So you see the correlation between the Sabbath that ended after 7 days and the Sabbath, which ended after 7 years. Again, they're both Shabuah. One is 7 days, one is 7 years. But you see the correlation, and that same correlation was given as to why they were 70 years in captivity and why after 490 years, they had to have 70 years in captivity. Now, the antithesis of that, Gabriel is giving Daniel what's going to happen in another 490 years. 470 Shabuahs. I should point out too, just because it can be used as weeks in what we call a week. In Daniel 10, in fact, Shabuah is 3 full weeks, 3 full Shabuahs, and in verse 13, it's 21 days. So the term can be what we call a week. But here in Daniel chapter 9, 70 weeks, 70 Shabuah means 70 sets of 7 years, or 490 years. Now, while I'm teaching, I may use the word weeks, or I may use the word Shabuah. Just so you know, I'm talking about years, 7 years. As I'm teaching here, if I say weeks or I say Shabuah, I'm talking about 7 years. 70 sets of 7 years, or 490 years. So, what's going to happen? What is Daniel told? What's going to happen at the end of 490 years? What's going to happen after 70 Shabuahs, 70 sets of 7? What is going to happen? Daniel 9:24 tells us 70 Shabuahs have been decreed for your people and your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. 6 items are listed here that are going to, this is what's going to happen for the holy city and for his people at the end of 70 Shabuahs. Now, in each one of these, the way it's going to be done, we know, is Jesus Christ. This is all about the accomplished work of Jesus Christ. Now, I could take a whole hour just going over these 6 things. I'm not going to do that. I think if any of you are interested in studying this, you could take each one of these things and show how Jesus accomplished these things. It's amazing that Daniel's told this. Again, this is part of the mystery. People didn't, I don't know if anyone, I didn't even understand this until the last year. I mean, this is part of God's mystery hidden in the scriptures of what God tells Daniel of what's going to happen. Just incredible. To finish the transgression. Well, what does that mean? Well, I think it's talking about the transgression of, like, Romans 3 and 4, through one transgression, sin entered the world, and through the offering of one man, that was fulfilled in Jesus Christ. To finish it. Make an end of sin. Well, how did that happen? Well, Jesus Christ offered himself. You can think of where it says in Corinthians, he became a sin offering. You can think of Hebrews, where it says, Jesus once for all made his sacrifice for sin. There is therefore now no more sacrifice for sin. He made an end of it. He brought an end to sin through his sacrifice. To make an atonement for iniquity. Well, the blood of Christ. The blood of the lambs could never truly make atonement for iniquity. That's why they had to do it every year. But through Jesus Christ, through his blood, atonement was made for us through the blood of Christ, right? To bring in everlasting righteousness. Well, how's that going to happen? Jesus Christ. And I think in this you can get everlasting life, right? That's when everlasting righteousness is going to come when he comes back. That's when we're going to get to the everlasting. And actually, that's when all this stuff is really going to be. I mean, right now it's been paid, but we're really going to understand this when Jesus Christ comes back. And it's going to bring in everlasting righteousness. Seal up vision and prophecy. Jesus is the end of prophecy. He is the end of vision. What he does. And then finally, to anoint the Mashiach, the most holy place. Now, some versions say most holy place. Some versions say most holy thing. Some versions say most holy one. I think King James Version just says the most holy, which I think is probably the most accurate. But what's that talking about? Well, you know what's going to happen when Jesus comes back? He's going to sit in the most holy place in Jerusalem, the Messiah. It will be anointed, the most holy. The most holy one will be in the most holy place doing the most holy thing, right? That's going to happen when Jesus Christ comes back. All these things point to Jesus. And this is what's going to happen at the end of 70 Shabuas. That's wild. This is a lot different than your people are going to go back and they're going to build a city and they're going to rebuild a temple and the desolations of the land and Jerusalem, we're going to have a city. He tells them the answer to man's problem. The answer to all mankind's problem is going to be solved in 70 Shabuas. Wow. This is spiritual. This is taking this to a whole nother plane. So not only does Gabriel tell Daniel what's going to happen, he tells him who's going to do it. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah, he tells them, until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The one that's going to make all this happen is the Messiah. He tells Daniel about the coming Messiah. I mean, this is amazing. This is part of the mystery of God that was hidden, not understood, but boy, it is just so clear that this was the answer to Daniel. And we know the word Messiah is in the Hebrew, it's Mashiach. It means the anointed one. In the Greek Testament, the Greek translates from the Hebrew, the Christ. This is the Christ. He's telling Daniel about the coming Christ, the coming Messiah, and what he will accomplish. So he not only tells him what's going to happen in 70 Shabuas, he tells him who it is that's going to make it happen. It's going to be the Messiah, God's Messiah, this one from the covenant of David that's going to rule forever. It's going to come through him. He not only tells us what's going to happen, he tells them when it's going to happen. There will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. What? So 77 Shabuas and 62 Shabuas. Right? What does this mean? If you break it up, 7 Shabuas, 7 times 7 is 49 years. 62 Shabuas is 7 times 62 is 434 years. A total of 69 Shabuas, a total of 483 years. I mean, this is amazing. He gives them specific time. He tells them what's gonna be accomplished, He tells him who's going to accomplish it, and he tells him when it's going to happen. This is unbelievable prophecy to this man, Daniel. It's like, I don't even know if Daniel comprehended what Gabriel told him here. I didn't even comprehend. I mean, I'm just comprehending this for the first time in my life. What Daniel was told here, that there will be 483 years. So this verse also tells us what event you start counting. When do we start counting towards the 483 years? And it tells us. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Okay. Now, I think you guys know I love calendars. I like chronology. I'm going to get kind of geeky. For some of you, you're going to love it. For some of you, you might say, John, just tell us what it means. I really would like to show this so you can see it for yourself. And take what I'm looking at and work it for yourself. Maybe you'll come up with a different answer, but this fits for me. And I know for myself, it has to fit for me to grasp it. And this fits so perfect. I get chills when I see the perfection of God's word on this topic. So there will be 483 years from the time that there is a decree issued. Now, a couple things I want you to point out here. It does not tell us here who is going to issue this decree, does it? It just says a decree. From the issuing of a decree. It tells us what the decree is going to be to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. It also, I should point out, the word decree, it's the Hebrew word dabar, which simply means word. There's going to be, someone's going to issue the word. Someone's going to speak forth a word to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. When that happens, when this decree, this word is given forth, until the Messiah, the Prince, there's going to be 483 years. Can the Bible be that exact? I show you. I think it can. Now, so there's 3 possible starting times that I can think of for this event. The first one, and I think in most things that I have read or what people have come to conclude of this, that this is the decree that is most commonly referred to as when this decree was issued. And that is the decree from Artaxerxes to send Nehemiah back to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And this occurred in the 20th year of the Persian king Artaxerxes, would have been in 445 BC. This is in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1. It says, it came about in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes. And this starts, and then the story is, Nehemiah was never sad before the king, and the king says, why are you so sad? And he says, well, there's Jerusalem's, there's no wall. So Artaxerxes makes a decree to send Nehemiah with a whole group of Judeans back to do this in the 20th year of Artaxerxes. Now, I have looked at these, and that's why I told you these Persian kings are very important to understand. This chronology is pretty much set in almost all the things I've read for these, especially this reign of Artaxerxes, from 465 to 425 BC. So I'm okay with saying, well, history's wrong, these dates are wrong, and that could be, and this could be the decree, and I'm fine with that. But I think there's another answer that I want to show you. But this decree would have occurred here in 445 BC. Now, this decree was to rebuild and restore, so that fits with what's said in Daniel. This was decreed by Artaxerxes. to do this. The only problem you have with this date is if you go 483 years later, you come to 39 AD, and that is too late. There is nobody anywhere that will tell you that Jesus was here in 39 AD. He'd already died, resurrected, he'd already ascended to the heaven, and the book of Acts had already commenced. So that's the only issue with this. Again, history, these dates might be wrong, and this could be the decree, and I'm kind of okay with that. But I think there's another answer. Another thing I've seen people do, which they you'll hear people talk about prophetic years, and that a prophetic year is a 360 year calendar year, where we know a year is 365 point whatever it is. There's a decimal point to that. Every 4 years we had a leap year so that it stays. So and then they do this whole calculation, and they can calculate it, and they divide and all this, and they try and come up with this. I don't know. For me, a year is one time around the sun, right? Every year. And a year is a year. So you could do that, but I don't think you have to. I think there's another answer. Another possibility is the decree to send Ezra back. Ezra was sent back with silver and gold to adorn the house of God at Jerusalem to teach the law of Ezra's God. And that happened in the 7th year of the Persian king Artaxerxes. And this is from Ezra 7. Ezra went up from Babylon, some of the sons of Israel, some of the priests, the Levites, the singers, the gatekeepers, and the temple servants went up to Jerusalem in the 7th year of Artaxerxes. So on the Persian rule, Ezra occurred before Nehemiah. Ezra here would have been in the 7th year of King Artaxerxes in 458 BC. All right. Now, there's two problems with this. One is this was not a decree to rebuild and restore Jerusalem. The decree that was given to Ezra was to adorn the temple and to teach the law. He was not given any go sign to go rebuild the city of Jerusalem, right? Ezra was not told he could do that. He was told to adorn the temple. He was told to teach the law. So that's the first problem with this being the start of the count of 483 years. The second problem with it is that if it starts 458 BC, that comes to 26 AD, 483 years, which that's a little too early for the time of Jesus Christ. So the Ezra decree is a little too early. The Nehemiah decree is a little too late. I think there's another possibility. And this one, the reason I get so excited about this one is because you don't see this unless you work the word, unless you're willing to look at scripture and read it and see it. It's in there. It's in the Bible, but you got to search for it. That's why I love this. And especially when it's the wisdom of God, the mystery of God, how God put this in here. I kind of feel it, it's like, I feel like God put this in there just for me, just so that we could understand. It's just, anyway. There is a third possibility, and that is that after Ezra arrived, I think maybe about 5 years, we don't know exactly, after, because he was there for 13 years before Nehemiah came, that after Ezra arrived, that he himself, Ezra, put forth a word to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. And this is hidden in the scripture, but it's there. If you have eyes to see, it's there. So, and this is something, until seeing this part of Ezra has always just driven me absolutely crazy. It just does, it never fit for me. Why is this in here? I just never could figure out why God would have put this in the book of Ezra. Remember I told you Ezra's chapter 1 through 6 is historical. He's looking back. 1 through 6 are about the rebuilding of the temple, right? It's all about rebuilding the temple. The context of Ezra 1 through chapter 6 is that Zerubbabel and Joshua were sent back under Cyrus. They built the foundations, and then there was a cease and desist. They had to stop working on the temple. And this came under Cambyses. All right, that was here. All right, under Cambyses, they put a cease order. And then Darius becomes king. And under Darius, the prophets Haggai and Zechariah start prophesying, right? And then in the second year of Darius, they speak and they motivate Zerubbabel and Joshua, and they finish the temple in 3.5 years, by the way, which is a whole nother issue, which we'll talk about later. But they finished the temple in 3.5 years, all right, under the reign of Darius, all right? That's basically what chapters 1 through 6 is about the problem, this thing that happened, right? But right in the middle of this, in this context, Ezra jumps. There's this little insertion, this little parenthetical insertion, which just doesn't fit. It's like, why is this in here? Ezra, why did you do this to us? It just doesn't fit. In the context, in Ezra chapter 4, verses 7 through 23, there is a little parenthetical insertion in the book of Ezra that just makes no sense. It doesn't fit. It is out of context. He jumps 58 years later in this parenthesis to the time of Artaxerxes. I'm going to encourage you this week, if you want, read Ezra 1 through 6. And remember that this is parenthetical. And what's in this parenthesis? I think during this time, while Ezra was there, he made a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. And that's what this parenthesis is about. It's there for us to know that Ezra made a decree. Ezra put forth a word. I don't think it was Nehemiah. I don't think it was here. I think something happened here. And I put it 5 years into it. We're not given a date, but I'll show you how well that date fits with things. So what happened during this parenthetical section in Ezra, I've given you verses and you can read it for yourself, but it's the people of the area, they're upset about what Ezra's doing. And so they write a letter to King Artaxerxes, and they complain that the Jews, which is Ezra and his crew, we're not talking about Zerubbabel and Yeshua at the early time under Darius and Cambyses. We're talking about Ezra. This is 58 years later. And what were they doing? They were rebuilding the city and finishing the walls. Who decided to do this? Ezra. Ezra issues a decree during this time, and it's in this little parenthetical insertion in the book of Ezra for this time that they started rebuilding the walls. And then Artaxerxes says, at the end of this, he says, I'll issue a decree that these men, they need to stop the work. This city may not be built until a decree is issued by me. So he says, I didn't give you the right to build the Jerusalem. I didn't give you the right to build the walls, Ezra. You were given the authority to take stuff in the temple. You were told you could teach. You weren't told you could rebuild Jerusalem and rebuild the walls. But Ezra did it. Ezra 4, 7 through 23 is not the cease and desist order regarding the construction of the temple, but rather it's specifically regarding finishing the walls and rebuilding the city of Jerusalem during the early reign of Artaxerxes, after Ezra had arrived in Jerusalem. And here I found this in the Jewish Encyclopedia that actually helped me, really got me excited about this. It says, in the 7th year of Artaxerxes, the Babylonian Jews requested that permission should be given to the priest Ezra to visit Palestine with full power over the Jews there and to enforce the book of the law as the will of the king. How the king acceded to his request and how Ezra endeavored to carry out his mission are well known. Ezra first took strong measures against the mixed marriages. This happens in those first several years he's there, which is recorded in Ezra, thereby in conflict with the people of the land, the Samaritans and their allies. And then it says, to protect himself against them, Ezra undertook to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Permission was not contained in the commission he had received from the king. And so Artaxerxes made him put a stop. But what this leaves room for is that the first issue of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem was not the one issued by Artaxerxes in the 20th year of his reign. It was actually by Ezra himself who put out the word to rebuild and restore Jerusalem. And I think it was probably happening about 5 years after he had arrived. And I put this decree of Ezra around 453 BC. We don't know the exact time, but check out what happens with this date for this decree. This will blow your mind. This is just incredible. So that starts the counting. So what happens at the end of this 7 weeks and 62 weeks? What happens? After 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. What are we talking about? The crucifixion. Daniel's not only told what's going to happen in the 70 years, he's not only told who's going to do it, the Messiah, he's not only told when it's going to happen, he's told about the Messiah will be cut off. He's going to be killed. He's going to be crucified. Daniel was told this after 483 years. The Messiah will be cut off. I think that's probably a good translation from the Hebrew. A lot of the good translations translate this, but some of the paraphrase versions actually, I think, give the essence of what this is. Again, I think the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing is a good translation. But let me just read you some of these more paraphrase versions of this, because it's really cool. This is from the NIV. After 62 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death and have nothing. The Common English Bible. After 62 weeks, an anointed one will be eliminated and no one will support him. From the Douay-Rheims Bible. And after 62 weeks, Christ shall be slain, and the people that shall deny him shall not be his. And from the Living Bible, look at this. After this period of 434 years, the anointed one will be killed, his kingdom still unrealized. I actually kind of like the Living Bible translation, although I think it's taking some liberties. I think that's the essence of what it's saying. The Messiah is going to be killed. He's going to be cut off, and it's going to look like he accomplished nothing. And isn't that what happened with the crucifixion? You know, the Messiah wasn't supposed to die. He wasn't supposed to die. That was not in the plan. And yet Daniel's told that's what's going to happen. Isn't that amazing? That just blows my mind that Daniel was told this, that the Messiah is going to be killed. Wow. So Daniel prophesied of the crucifixion of the coming Messiah, even giving the year that he's going to die for sins, 483 years after a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. So, okay, more stuff. What year did Jesus die? Okay, can we really know this? I think we can. Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea between 26 AD and 36 AD. The ministry of Jesus and the crucifixion occurred somewhere between these dates, between 26 AD on the one end, 36 AD on the long end, somewhere in there. I still believe, and I think that it fits what I learned, and I think a lot of you have learned this also through the years. There's evidence for a Wednesday crucifixion. Jesus Christ, our Passover, the Companion Bible. There's actually many resources on this that you can look at. Here's one I found that I will give a link to you at the end from this professor at Cambridge University. And he has really, I don't agree with his conclusion, but his work to try and show that the crucifixion was on a Wednesday at the time of the Passover. And between 26 AD and 36 AD, he points out there were four Wednesdays that occur, where the Passover occurred on a Wednesday, between 26 AD and 36 AD. He also points out that Matthew 11:9 says that there were leaves on the fig trees, and that this is a late bearing fruit. So two of those Wednesdays are in March early, other two are in late April. And so it makes much more sense that it really comes down to two different Wednesdays where Christ could have been crucified as the Passover lamb. Either Wednesday, April 28th and 28 AD, or Wednesday, April 25th, 31 AD. So he thinks it's 28 AD. I think it was Wednesday, April 25th, 31 AD. Now, really, can I be that bold to say that? Yeah, I'm going to be that bold. And I'm going to show this to you because it's incredible, amazing. I introduced to you. I'm going to show you two. If you like to study this stuff like I do, if you like chronology, if you like to get into this stuff, I'm going to give you two resources here that are just great resources. These are in your syllabus, by the way. I'll also have these links on the final page I give you here. First, I give you the Hebrew calendar. Now, the Hebrew calendar is critical to understanding dates, especially related to the Hebrew festivals. All the Hebrew festivals are based on a lunar calendar. And what's so cool about them is you could trace them back historically. We could put in the computer and we could know the movement of the moon. We could know when there was a full moon. All the Passover, the 14th of the month was always at a full moon. And you can actually go back and find out every year in history when the Passover was. It's not guesswork. It's based on the lunar calendar. And this Hebrew calendar shows you, it's just amazing. So I give you the Hebrew calendar. What is the Hebrew calendar? Here it is. And what you do, when you pull this up, it's blank. And here you put in here the year, and you can go back into BC, AD, and you can find out every year in history when all the Jewish feasts occurred. When the Feast of Passover was, when the Feast of Tabernacle was, when the Feast of Pentecost. You can find out all these dates because they're based on a lunar moon. And that's what this calendar is based on. So I put in 31 AD. And what's it show? The Passover in 31 AD was a Wednesday, April 25th. And on the bottom, it gives you all the different Hebrew events. So this calendar, if you like to study Jewish festivals, when they occurred every year in history, the Hebrew calendar, man, it's awesome. So according to the Hebrew calendar, 31 AD, April 25th, Passover was on a Wednesday. All right? Okay. The second thing I want to introduce to you, the BC AD calculator. This is great. If you want this, if you like this stuff, this is, some of you guys are like, John, I don't want to hear. But some of you guys are like, oh, let me know about it. So I hope you're one of those, because I just love the chronology. I love how this stuff fits. Why do you need a BC AD calculator? Here's the problem when you go from AD to BC. There is no year zero. All right. Historically, when you go from 1 BC, you don't go 1 BC 0, 1 AD. It goes from 1 BC to 1 AD. So you can't just do, how we do negative numbers and you subtract. It doesn't work because there is no zero. So it seems like it shouldn't be that hard, but it gets complicated. So how do you figure out when you're going from trying to figure out something that happened in AD and something happening in BC? I give to you the BC AD calculator. Now, I should point out in your syllabus, they changed the URL. So at the end of the session, I'll have this URL is slightly different than the one that's in your syllabus. So I'll have it so you can get it. But if you like to study this stuff and you want to look at this on your own, the BC AD calculator is awesome. I just love this stuff. I don't know. I just eat it up because it's so much. It's a lot of fun too. You just put in numbers and see how things work out. So here I give you, this is it. Here's the BC AD calculator. And what you do is you put in, okay, here's the date in the AD and here's the date in BC. I want to know how many years are between these two dates. That's what I'm looking at. I want to find 483 years. I want to find 69 Shabuas, right? How does it work? Okay, so I put in here April 25th, 31 AD. That was the Passover in 31 AD. And then I put in when I think Ezra decreed to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, 453 years, which was 5 years after Ezra arrived in Jerusalem. So 31 AD to 453 BC. And then you hit calculate 483 years, 62 Shabuas and 7 Shabuas. 483 years between those two dates. I'm just telling you, this is one of those cool things that is just like, really? Could the word of God, could it be that exact? Could Daniel have nailed it that exactly when the Messiah is cut off? I think he could. So now, here's another question. Why divide it up? Why say 62 weeks and 7 weeks, right? Why not just say 69 weeks? Why divide it up? Why say 62 Shabuas and 7 Shabuas? Why? I think there's an answer to that. You ready for this? In Second Temple Judaism, there were actually 2 temples. One was the first temple that was there when Ezra arrived, right? That temple was replaced in 19 BC by Herod the Great, and he rebuilt a second temple. So Second Temple Judaism actually had 2 temples, the temple of Zerubbabel and Joshua, and the temple of Herod. Herod the Great rebuilt the temple in 19 BC. The first temple built by Zerubbabel and Joshua, which was the functioning temple under Ezra when Ezra arrived, and I believe in 453 when a decree was made to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. All right? Second temple. The second temple was built by Herod the Great in 19 BC. This was the temple at the time of Jesus, when he was there, of the Messiah. All right, let's get the AD calculator, the AD BC calculator out again. If you go from 19 BC to 453 BC, 434 years, 62 Shabuas from the time Ezra made a decree until the temple was replaced by Herod the Great. 19 BC to 31 AD, 7 Shabuas, 49 years from the time. So you got 7 weeks, 62 weeks, 2 temples, 2 time periods, 483 years. I'm telling you, this fits. It really does. And I just get absolutely in awe. One other thing I want to point out here in this whole thing. Remember early in the Gospel of John, I think Jesus' ministry was 3.5 years. I think the more I look at the whole the whole idea of 3.5 years, and I think when you get to John chapter 2, and Jesus comes at a Passover in Jerusalem, that was 3 years before his death. I think that Passover was in 28 AD, that Jesus came to the temple in 28 AD. Okay. Remember what he did there? In 28 AD, in John 2:19, Jesus answered and said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will build it up. The Jews said it took 46 years to build this temple. You're going to raise it up in 3 days? That Passover was at 46 years. 3 years later, boom, 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 31 AD, 49 years. Just another little tidbit. It didn't cost you any extra for that. So, putting it all together, this chart is in your notes on page 73 of your syllabus, and this is putting this all together. I think that the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem occurred here, 453 BC. 62 Shabuas, 434 years. The temple was, another temple replaced it in 19 BC, and that went for 7 weeks, or 49 years. Jesus died in 31 AD. The Messiah was cut off. So 62 weeks and 7 weeks, or a total of 483 years from the decree of Ezra until the death of the Messiah for the Jewish people to make atonement for sin. That's a lot. So, but you know what? That's only 483 years. That's only 69 Shabuas. We're missing a week. He said 70 weeks. That's only 69 weeks. What's going on here? One more week remains. One more week remains. And between the time of, because at the time of the cross, there's no more need for sacrifice for sin. The veil was rent in twain, and there was no reason to have the temple. The purpose of it was gone. The meaning of it was gone. The reason for it was gone. One more week remains. And after that 70 weeks, then finally those 7 things to finish transgression, make an end of sin, make atonement for iniquity, bring in everlasting righteousness, seal up mercy, and anoint the most holy place will occur. There's one more week for mankind. One more week for God's people. One more week for the city of Jerusalem. And in between this time is the mystery. Hidden in God, was not understood. It's been 2,000 years almost. The 7 weeks is, this final week is coming. One more set of 7 years. And that is what's in Daniel 9, 26b through 27. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end, there will be war. Desolations are determined. And he will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. In this final 7 years, it looks like, according to this, there is going to be a sanctuary in the city again. I think there's one more temple for 7 more years that will be built. Somehow this one that's called the little horn, he's called the beast. Here he is called the prince who is to come. Here he is called the one who makes desolate. He is going to make a covenant, some treaty, probably within those 10 nations that we learned about in chapter 7, right? He's going to make this treaty, and everything's going to be hunky-dory. For 3.5 years, it's going to be great and glorious. And then something's going to happen in the middle of that week, the abomination of desolation. or the abomination which brings about desolation is going to take place. And then you have the final 3.5 years, the time of the beast, a time, a times, and a half a time, the 42 months of Revelation, where this one, and then after that is the desolation, and the seventh trump sounds, and all this is fulfilled in the last 70 years. So here, I'll leave this up a little longer if you would like to take a picture of this with these different, especially the URLs. But these are the verses that we looked at tonight: Daniel chapter 9, verses 20 through 27, Genesis 29, 16 through 28, Leviticus 23, 15 through 15, Leviticus 25, 1 through 6. Those are talking about the Feast of Shabuah, Nehemiah and Ezra. Again, I do recommend it. If you really want to look at this, read Ezra chapter 1 through 6. And you'll see that parentheses about the time of Artaxerxes is just, it doesn't fit. It's this little parenthetical insertion in the middle of that context there in Ezra. And here's that article from that Dr. Pallant Ramsunder of Cambridge University showing a Wednesday crucifixion. I don't agree with a lot of of his conclusions, but his information on that Jesus died on a Wednesday is pretty good. The Hebrew calendar, there's the link for the Hebrew calendar. Again, it's based on the movement of the moon, so we can be pretty confident in these dates for the Hebrew feasts. And then the BC AD calculator. If you like to do numbers, you like to play with this stuff, if you're an accountant and you like to do these things, the BC AD calculator is a lot of fun and a very useful tool for figuring these things out. So Daniel chapter 9, that's Daniel chapter 9, the 70 weeks.